Welcome to Beyond the Business Card podcast. Pictures of people driving Lamborghinis or just telling stories about how they became overnight successes. And I call that bullshit.
99% of successful people have had to roll up their sleeves, go through the dogfights, have had to, deal with those very, very lonely lows. You stand on the edge of the cliff and do I jump off or do I turn around and go get some safety? You're not going to learn that in school, university. They give you the basics, and it's a protected environment. The world's not that way. And until you actually discover that for yourself, you're going to take a few knocks along the road. You learn every day. Learning doesn't stop. The punches don't stop. So when I sit across from somebody, you can quite quickly work out who they are, what their values are, how they operate. I watch people, how they deal with other people.
While most people play it safe, Steve turned down Red Sea and Korea, flew to Saudi with no plan, and built a business on instinct. No hype, just guts and execution.
I want to stand back and go, Jesus, that was hard, but I did it.
Hi guys, welcome back to Beyond the Business Card. I hope you're well. And today we have an amazing guest. Today we've got Steve Little. Now, I brought Steve on because I'm intrigued as to what Steve does as a business, because he is in Saudi. But the chunk of his business is in Saudi. And if there's a lot of questions I get running a recruitment business, living in the GCC that I've had for a long time, it's what's going on in Saudi. So here we can really unpick what's going on from a person who's got a business and who's on the ground. We can answer all the questions that I get. But Steve not only is in Saudi, but he's got a really interesting story. He's worked across the GCC. He's worked in the UK. He's from South Africa. So we're going to unpick that entire journey. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's quite surreal to be here, to be honest. It's been one hell of a journey.
Good. Well, look, we're going to enjoy the conversation. Obviously, Beyond the Business Card, what we do is we unearth the story behind the entrepreneur. Okay. Every entrepreneur has an amazing story, and often one that's filled with the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what we do in this podcast is we unearth the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay. I'm an entrepreneur myself. I can tell you now, having run a business for 17 years, I've probably gone out of business nearly twice, but I've had some amazing years as well. I would never change anything. It's the best thing I've ever done. I advise and coach entrepreneurs now, and I love it. But the journey is filled with ups and downs. And when I was looking into opening up another business, so I have a coaching and advisory practice, I went on YouTube and I wanted to discover those that were running coaching and advisory practices. And I found just this litany of pictures of people driving Lamborghinis or just telling stories about how they became overnight successes. And I call that bullshit. All right.
I agree.
And so that's when the idea for the podcast came up. And I wanted to get people on who'd lived life, who'd built businesses, because everyone I know is really successful. They've taken their sweet time to get there and they're genuine experts in what they do. All right.
Okay. So
getting you on the show is an absolute honor. And tell us a bit about yourself and give us a bit of an intro.
So Steve Little, born in Johannesburg in South Africa, schooled there, had I wouldn't say stereotypical, but a normal childhood. Come from a blue-collar working background. Folks are originally from Scotland, moved out in South Africa in the 70s for a better life. I don't think Paisley offers much in terms of opportunity. So they took up the opportunity to move to Johannesburg. My brother and I were born there, schooled there. Played rugby, swam, ran around outside, all the normal stuff you could do in the 70s and 80s. How I'm still alive, I don't know, because of some of the stuff we did. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Then when I was 19, I was a bit clueless as to what I was going to do with my life. I'd come from that get a job, get a trade, and you work till you're 65, put a bit of money away every month, and then you die. Didn't really sit well with me. So a couple of mates who were sitting around, we said, let's go to London and see what's out there. We'd grown up during the sort of apartheid South Africa, so it was quite suppressive. We left, and our eyes were sort of ripped open, I suppose. For the world that is out there. Spent 10 years in London, put myself through uni, got my electrical engineering degree. Used to work as a sparky electrician on the London Underground because it allowed me to go to uni. It was only 4 to 6 hour shifts, good money, and then I could go to uni on the back of that. Backpacked around the world a little bit at the same time, maybe a little bit more than what I should have done, but it was good times. And then I'd just bought a house in the UK, or in London, and a friend of mine phoned me up and said, come to Dubai. They're paying crazy money for project managers. So I thought, no, I'm quite comfortable. I was working for a big contracting company in the UK at the time called Balfour Beatty. That was, it exceeded what my parents had. Had sort of envisaged for me. So he then said he convinced me to come out for the rugby sevens.
That's always a good time to come out.
It was. I think it was the beer. It was come for the beer and the rugby. So, I was still playing rugby at the time. So I thought, why not? It could be a laugh. So I came out and he had staged an interview for me. I sat down with a gentleman. He said to me, right, this is what we're offering for your position. I asked what everyone that works in the UK asks, how much do I get after tax? And he said, no, that is your salary. So I quickly did the maths in my head and I said, you're what? He's like, yeah, no, that's what you take home every month. So I was like, this is rubbish. You don't pay this kind of money. So I got on the plane, went back to the UK, went back to work, and an email popped up with a formal offer. So I sent it to my mate. I said, is this legit? Is this? He says, yeah, it's legit. And then he said, yeah, but ask for a relocation allowance, or ask for all these other bits and pieces. It's like, no, you're taking the piss. He was like, no, do it. So I cut and pasted his email, sent it back. They came back and went, yes. And before I knew it, I was on the next plane out to Dubai. And that was, when was that? December 2006.
Wow. Okay. So you came in 2006. You came when it was crazy town still.
Oh, it was mental.
Yeah.
Absolutely mental.
Right.
I was going to meetings where variations for contracts were basically just agreed in meetings and signed off. There you go. I'd come from the London Underground where to change a light bulb, you needed to destroy half the Amazon forest,
God.
And guys were just issuing variations. So that's where it went. And so I went through that sort of journey and worked and sort of pushed my way up as much as I could. I was never really happy with where I was at the time. I always wanted to be one step ahead. Always wanted what was in front of me. What I perceived was success, the next step. So I pushed and I pushed and I pushed and I pushed. Ended up in Muscat, working for a big UAE-based contracting company to set up their business in Oman. That was some highs, some pretty dark lows, some very dark lows. And then, it eventually became successful and, we broke through. And about 9 years in, I got headhunted by an oil and gas entity, went across to them. I didn't like it. It was very pleasant is probably the word. Everybody, you come from contracting, everyone's fighting, everyone's arguing, everyone's pushing, but everyone's pushing and arguing for the same thing to try to deliver the project. You go into oil and gas, it's all very pleasant. There's no arguments, there's no fighting, there's just, we need to get it done. We go, how can we support you? And there was no sense of accomplishment. We'd go and put in hundreds of kilometers of pipeline and you cover it up with sand at the end and walk away and no one even knows that you've been there. So coming from where we were building hotels on the top of mountains to staff accommodation in the middle of nowhere to putting a pipe in the ground I didn't have that buzz. The money was great, the bonuses were great, but the sense of accomplishment wasn't there. So the enjoyment of the finances wore off quite quickly. Then after that was just around COVID time.
Were you still whereabouts are you located?
So I was based in Oman, but the business entity I was looking after was in Khobar.
Okay.
So I was living in Bahrain, commuting across to Khobar every day, then commuting back to Oman on the weekends.
Wow.
So it was very disconnected.
And for people that don't understand what sort of travel time is that?
So from Bahrain to Khobar is maybe 40 minutes.
Okay.
So
literally over a bridge, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
So it's a relatively decent journey because you 30 kilometers, you're traveling over water.
Yep.
So you got the ocean on either side of you and you drive across, then you're straight into the craziness of Khobar and then you come back across to...
It has a reputation of weekends, that bridge.
It's insane. It's insane. Yeah, I mean, I've heard names of Bahrain, as Bar Vegas and so on. I never experienced any of that. I was only there during the weeks. Then I got a call saying, look, the airports are shutting down. The causeway is going to shut down. You need to get out of Khobar and back to Oman. So I went back to Oman. Lockdown happened. First time in probably 6 years, I wasn't commuting every week. I was locked down in Oman for 9 months. It gives you a lot of time to reevaluate your sort of life and what you want.
What was Oman like being locked down?
Oman was unbelievable. It was amazing. You go for a walk on the beach. Yeah, the Omanis, I love them to pieces. They're absolutely amazing. It's that. How would I describe it? Maybe like a Mediterranean sort of mindset. Manana. Don't worry, we'll deal with it. So it was really, really good. I'm talking from a personal perspective. I'm pretty sure there were some people who had it quite rough and experienced some difficulties. But from my personal perspective, it was great. I was locked down, had my son with me 24/7, and attend a few online meetings, and it was great. At the end of that, when the airports, everything started to open up a bit, I was due to go back to Bahrain. I decided, no, it's not for me. Enough's enough. So then I relocated my family up to Dubai, moved back up, and I was sort of sniffing around, seeing what was going on. Bearing in mind, I'd always come from that drill sergeant, get a job, big company, stability, everything. To a good friend of mine phoned me up and said, look, we're going to be launching into Saudi. Do you know anything about getting involved in business in Saudi? How do we mobilize our supply chain into Saudi so that we can, deliver the same sort of quality product as what we've got here in the UAE? I said, I have no clue. I have no idea. I said, but let me jump on a plane and go and knock on some doors. With being in the region for as long as I had, Oman, a lot of the boys I knew from Oman had moved across to Saudi. And so I thought, let me go and have a chat. Let's see what's going on. Met a great guy over there, Okab Alanazi, who has since become my business partner. And at the time, I said to him, look, what are the possibilities? What are the loopholes? What are the obstacles for international businesses coming into Saudi? He said, no, look, it's relatively straightforward. If you know the right people, as is the Middle East, you know the right people, everything becomes quite simple. So I said, okay, let me have a look. I said, what are the costs? How do we go about this? So we set up a a business, well, first I came back and sat and thought about it and went, if I'm not going to do this now, I'm never going to do it. So, you stand on the edge of the cliff and do I jump off or do I turn around and go get some safety? And at the time I had offers from Red Sea Development as a project director. I had offers from Doria Gate as a project director. So it was, do I jump off this cliff and back myself? And if so, how long have I got before money runs out? You've still got bills to pay, you've got kids to school, you've got food to put on the table. How long have I got? So I'd sort of budgeted about a year, right? I can do this. And then if that fails, I'll just go become a project director on the Red Sea or Doria Gate. But I wasn't really keen because it was this 9-to-5 grind. So I rolled the dice, as they say. I'd never in my life sat down and thought, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to give it a go. I want to be this big businessman. So I backed myself, and touch wood, it's been going on quite well from day one, which was insane. It was refreshing to see how many people or businesses were wanting to be in Saudi, but were in the same position as the friend of mine. They didn't know where to go, what doors to knock. The internet, it has a little bit of information. Subsequently, since then, a lot of businesses have now gone there and do what I do, which is, I look at it as a compliment. Okay, there was a market, people are now interested, and the market is quite significant.
But I guess you had first mover advantage there. I mean, Steve, to be honest with you, I could have done with having a chat with you about 2 years ago. we used a company who were established here, and what I didn't realize was that I was guinea pig when we went up and opened in Saudi, and the whole thing took 14 months and cost double the amount. In fact, it's the only time I've ever set up a business where I had to renew the license before I could use it.
Yeah. And have you managed to open a bank account?
Yeah, we've done it all now. But honestly, I mean, my poor ops team, it was a very stressful experience. I think there's only one way of summarizing it, and very costly. But we did it wrong. So that's partly one of the reasons I wanted to get you on the podcast today, was just to unearth some truths, okay, what it's like. Because I think there's quite a few people that don't really know what it's like out there, and you can really sort of answer those questions. But obviously, in terms of you as an entrepreneur, the reason I just want to stop you there is I just want to go back and I just want to understand. It's clear that your parents and life in South Africa has had a big impact, and making them proud has had a big impact on you. But what was it like growing up in South Africa in the 70s and 80s? Because not a lot of people will appreciate what South Africa was like then. They're probably, particularly some of my viewers and listeners will not know what life in apartheid was like. And particularly for British, you are the son of British parents who moved there. So help us understand that a little bit.
To be honest, I didn't fully understand it until I'd moved away. Growing up, I was just a kid. I got up every day like every kid. I go into school. I got bullied. I bullied. I had my lunch money stolen. It was, we rode BMXs on the weekend or after school. I think I didn't truly appreciate or understand the complexity and severity of what was going on in the country until I left. Because it's all I knew.
Yeah.
My parents weren't politically orientated. There was never, any sort of animosity towards anybody. My parents came from Paisley, which, if anyone knows, it's a toilet, right? It's probably the best way to describe it. It's this horrible little town. They've got Glasgow Airport there, and outside of that, you've predominantly got boarded up houses and junkies, so that would have been, so my brother and I, if we'd stayed there, we would have either been in jail or junkies, that would have been our path.
Right.
So for them, this was, amazing. They went from a tiny studio in Paisley to a 3-bedroom house with a swimming pool. We grew up, we could get the bus to school. It was just, as far as I knew, a normal childhood. Little did I know all the political stuff going on. Yes, you saw it in the newspapers and on the TV, but I was too young to fully understand what was going on. And when Nelson Mandela got released in 91, it was huge for the country.
Gotcha.
But again, I didn't fully appreciate or understand what was going on. I was too busy playing rugby, chasing girls, dismantling and reassembling skateboards and bicycles, just the normal stuff that you got up to in the 70s, 80s, riding BMXs, no helmets, trying to kill your brother, the normal stuff. And then when I went to London, you then can see what, you've got cultures mixing. You can walk down the street and everyone's just there, just leading their life, going to work, looking after their children. So then when I went back to South Africa, it was, hang on, this is not right. What we did, and I use we as in the privileged white folk, to the blacks was disgusting, and so that never really sat well with me. So the longer I've been away, the less I've wanted to go back. South Africa is a beautiful place. It has so much to offer. It's, my childhood memories are phenomenal, from swimming in the lakes with mates on the weekend to, driving down to the ocean on school holidays. Those were all fantastic childhood memories. But there was this darkness that was going on sort of behind the scenes that I was unaware of until I'd actually left it. And then I realized, hang on a second, this is not right.
Gotcha. And in terms of like obviously your parents moved there, you've got a brother. Are you the oldest?
I'm the eldest.
You're the eldest. Okay. What's it like? I think a lot of people underestimate, like you obviously left the country for opportunity, right? Was there a wave of people that left the country for opportunity? And what's that like, sort of leaving your family at the young age that you did?
So to answer your first question, the wave, so there was a sort of trend in South Africa at the time. I'm sure it was elsewhere in the world, but in South Africa at the time, you sort of did two things, one of three things. You either went to university, or you went and worked on a kibbutz, or you went and pulled pints in London, and then you go back and do your university. I had a British passport. I'm not going to Israel to work on a kibbutz. I can go and earn double that in a pub in London, So I went and did that. So it was quite common for guys and girls who've just finished school, didn't really know what they wanted to do, would go do a gap year outside of South Africa. I'd probably say at the time, maybe only 60 to 70% would return. And then that percentage increased as the years went on, more so for opportunity. My leaving, while I didn't understand at the time, was for opportunity. For me, it was just to go and have a party with my mates.
Okay.
And that real life education, when you leave the comfort of the home, I left 700 pounds in my back pocket and everything I owned in a backpack, and probably spent the first 300 pounds in the first 2 weeks, and then you realize, I got to pay rent. I got to put food on the table. So you then start to grow up. So that was kind of the rationale. It wasn't really any huge forward thinking. I'm going to go and find a good job or, get involved in what was it at the time, the MSc, MCSE, whatever the Microsoft qualification, become a software geek over there. That wasn't what it was. It was just go and see what was out there. I think also one of the big drivers was because I was a Scottish expat kid, I grew up in South Africa without any immediate family. We were part of a expat community, a British expat community. So there were grands there, which I called them grandpa, uncle, aunts, but they were just friends. They weren't immediate family. So I didn't have that root base. So that was one of the drivers. When I'd been in London about 6 months, I went up to Glasgow to discover my heritage.
Did you stay there long?
I lasted 11 months, and then I was like, winter kicked in, and I was like, I'm out of here. This is for the birds. So no, it was that was I think that was probably the subconscious driver, was to go and see where I came from.
What? So how old were you when you left?
19.
What advice would you give to anyone who's 19 now in South Africa or beyond? What would you say, given your experience?
To do it. So a couple of years before I finished school, you used to have to go, in South Africa, it was mandatory to do 2 years military service. Okay, that got abolished just before I finished school. I think we can be too protected in the world. And there's only one way to learn, and that's to get in the fight. You know, you can think about things, you can cover all bases, you can, overanalyze, put mitigation plans in place, or you can do all of that. But until you get in the fight, you're not going to know how it's going to turn out. And there's only one way to learn. I played rugby a long, long time, and you can train, you can throw the ball, you can tackle, you can do, but until you've got somebody else running at you full speed, you don't know what you're going to do, So get in the fight and try to figure it out. There's a lot of kids out there that are lost. I think this, and now I'm going to sound like a really old man, the whole social media perception, you touched on it when you look to set up your coaching business, the instant success, the Lamborghinis, that's all nonsense. That you've got to roll your sleeves up and get stuck in. Yes, there's one or two anomalies to that. Okay. But 99% of successful people have had to roll up their sleeves, go through the dogfight, have had to, deal with those very, very lonely lows. When you sit there and you question yourself, you think, is this right? Have I done, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? How am I going to pay this bill? And you drive yourself. You get up and you're not going to learn that in school, university. They give you the basics, and it's a protected environment. The world's not that way. And until you actually discover that for yourself, you're going to take a few knocks along the road.
It sounds like you're not afraid of getting your hands dirty. And pardon the pun, because I know you very much did in the London Underground. But where do you think that drive? So because you telling your story, you've moved to the UK, you've detached from most of your family by the sounds of it. You've come to do a job, working in a pub, but actually what you've done is you've got stuck in, you've gone and built a career for yourself, and it's, by the sounds of it, a lovely life, right? What was motivating you? What was the drive there?
I think, in the early days, it was probably, it was just, I wanted more. And not from a superficial perspective. I don't want a Lamborghini. I don't want big mansions. I don't want all of that. What I want is to wake up and do what I want to do when I want to do it.
Mm.
I want to have a little beach shack that I go sit on the porch, drink my morning coffee, go out for a bike ride, and come back and then go for a swim in the ocean. That's what I want. But I knew I would never get that by stashing 10% of my paycheck every month for 55 years. That was never going to happen. So I had two options. One, chase what I want and try get there, or turn up and stash my cash every month. That motivation changed after I had kids. I think we as parents have always got to give our kids that one step up. Mine certainly gave it for me and my brother.
And is that what drives you? It sounds like you, like, from what I can take from how you're responding, is making your parents proud was something that really sat with you. And now responsibility of looking after your kids that you had has been driving you. So I think every entrepreneur has, like I've said it time and time again, you've got to have passion and purpose, right? And it seems like passion and purpose have sort of been driven from you, I'm going to assume from your parents at an early age.
Yes, I think so. Sports as well.
Right.
My parents in sports.
That's interesting you say sports, because I've said this time and time again, that so many entrepreneurs that I meet, for granted, many of them say they would be professional football players or rugby players, or I think we all got that story. I'm one of them, by the way. I'm one of them.
And me.
But that seems to run through a lot of the DNA as well, right?
Yeah.
So, but just give us an idea, because, what we do here is we try and get into the mind of the entrepreneur. And it's very interesting that that it's clear that those are really deeply rooted, ingrained in you. Where does that come from, do you think?
Honestly, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know whether it was from a young age. I was always very competitive. Yeah,
With your brother?
I think that's where it started. But then, I would go and swim. So, I swam for my school. I then swam for my province. I then, went for South Africa colours, and I didn't make it. And then it was rugby, and then pushed at rugby. And there wasn't a sport that I didn't want to get involved in, and I didn't want to exceed at. I always wanted to be at the top of whatever sport I got involved in. And I think then that competitiveness and that desire to push to the front has just, when the body starts to give up and you can't quite play like you used to, in your mind, you've got extra gears to run through a gap, but your body's saying, sorry, my friend, you're going to go at this pace. You then transition that into other parts of your life, and you try push, to be the best at what you can be. I'm not ego driven. I don't need external validation. I don't need, a huge press. I'm an extrovert introvert, if that makes sense. I can be, social. I can go and talk to people. I can maybe stand up in front of people is a bit of a push too far, but even like this podcast, it's put me right out of my comfort zone. But I like my own time. I have a very small network of friends, close friends, and I keep it there. I don't have 300 friends and go and do things every weekend. I cycle a lot, and I've got a small group of friends. We go and rip each other's legs off every weekend. Actually, they rip my legs off at the moment, but, so that's more who I am. I like to stay behind the scenes. I get an immense sense of satisfaction seeing people that I care about succeed. So pushing them ahead, mentoring younger people. That might have changed a little bit. I've got quite a lot where I have to call them and say, how do I do this on Instagram, and how do I do this on LinkedIn? So there's that learning thing. So to answer your previous question, kids these days, they need to learn the harsh realities of life, because they're not going to get it from behind a screen. And maybe that's a old school mentality way of thinking about it. I'm not sure. But, bosses are never going to always be nice. clients are not always going to be nice. You're going to have failures with clients. You're going to have failures with customers. You're going to have successes with clients, and customers. And it's learning how to deal with both of those that you won't get unless you're in the mix. And I think the youth of today, we as parents, we try to protect them from that mix, because we're a little bit too aware of how bad it feels when you're at your lowest, or when someone's spoken to you in a certain way, or someone else's actions don't marry up with your principles, and how it then affects you. So it's tough. It's tough. And I think there's a lot of pressure on the youth of today in terms of the perception of life, and the reality is completely different.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think life through YouTube is never going to be life. It's never going to meet reality. And I didn't go to, so just so you know a bit about me, my father he died when I was pretty young, right? So I was brought up by a single mum. Went into this. I was good at sport. Managed to get me into a nice school. But didn't go to university. So in private schools in the UK, you got to get they want to get you to university because it looks good, so they can start selling your place, right? That's the reality. It's a business. I didn't go, so I did the University of Life, I call it, and it served me incredibly well, right? Now my wife, she took a very different path. She went to a very good, Leeds University, one of the top universities in the UK, and then got into the BBC and worked in the BBC for 11 years and got paid zero money, whereas I took a very sort of commercial route. And we have quite different outlooks. But I think when I talk to a lot of my old school friends now, I think quite a few of them are envious of the path that I took of getting into work early, because the degrees that they took never really served them well. So I've always been a little bit torn about, and I lean on getting stuck in work experience because I think I always had a head start from everyone. But sometimes if you want to take a more traditional path in lawyers, etc., then I'd say, university can serve you well. But getting stuck in, getting your hands dirty, that is what you have to do. Don't be afraid of, I rose through ranks in my business because I worked bloody hardest. I was first in and last out. Can you do that in hybrid work now? I don't know. Very hard to tell, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're in this weird period of flux with technology, with, you and I were talking off camera. What skills would we teach our kids? These days, well, electricians and plumbers were ones that came up because AI isn't going to take that right now, right? So I think it is a really, really tough period to grow up, because what industries are going to be there? What are you going to do? You've got people like you and I have got old school values that are serving us very well, but maybe, hard to apply to people growing up in a world where everything's on a screen. I don't know what the answer is. Do you?
I don't. I don't.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things we're going to see, right?
Absolutely. And I think there needs to be a middle ground. The old school values meets the sort of modern way of life. And then somewhere in the middle, there's the sort of sweet spot. Outside of that, you can't have too much of one and too much of the other, because it's not going to bode well.
Yeah. Although I will say something quite interesting. My 10-year-old, she's got this brilliant. She's got a YouTube channel, right? Okay. It's a faceless YouTube channel. She's basically brilliant on this game, Dress to Impress, right? Which I've got I know I've heard it so many times. I know the music to it as well. I was in a cafe the other day and I could tell two girls were on this game. That's how much it's ingrained in my head. But she's created all these different dance moves and catwalk shows and dresses and everything. And she's created this faceless YouTube channel. She is getting thousands of followers on this.
Yeah.
And it's getting very popular. She's getting the odd person really be quite rude to her. So she's getting, which we delete straight away. But Helen and my wife and I were talking, we're like, she might be building a little business here.
You're going to retire.
which is incredible. So there is, as for everything, there is opportunity is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely.
Now, your story from where you told it at the beginning, it was very it sounds like you'd kind of taken the corporate path, and you'd got to a point where, life was good, right? Life was good. But you sound like you're an accident in some respects, the way you packaged it and told your story. I could call you an accidental entrepreneur, but there's another part of me that doesn't think that, because you're not risk averse. You left South Africa at 19. You know, you moved to Dubai. You've taken, you know, there's a track record there that shows that you do take the plunge, right? Perhaps you just need to be pushed a little bit.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think it was always there. It was maybe the school of life. You know, do my learning on someone else's dime. And then when I felt I was ready and had taken enough blows, that then I could jump off the cliff and it would go. I mean, I'm sure you're the same, and every entrepreneur out there or business owner is, you learn every day. Learning doesn't stop. The punches don't stop. There's different problems, there's different scenarios, there's things that you're faced with on a daily basis that are no other industry or position can teach you. But an accidental entrepreneur is probably the most apt label to put around.
But I said it and challenge it because I don't think you're risk averse. I think, and also, as with anything, opportunities come to those that are prepared to stick their neck out, right? And, but what year was it that you went to Saudi to explore what things are like?
When was it? Would have been halfway, about 2022.
2022. Okay. So in 2022, I bet, now I know that was our best year ever in recruitment, by the way. If you weren't like, that's post-COVID, that's when liquidity was in the market. Everyone was moving up the ladder, right? It was a great year. So you probably had a number of decent job offers on your lap, right?
With substantial packages.
There you go. So I throw it to you, Mr. Accidental Entrepreneur. You chose the harder option.
Correct.
Yeah. You chose to go to Saudi, park those job offers and give it a crack. So that's where I challenge this. And that's, what do you think made you want to go out and explore what it was like in Saudi? Why did that suddenly change? Why did that, going from the comfort, the easy option to taking this path? What was going on?
I think it was a combination of things. One, I wanted to make my kids proud.
Okay.
And leave them a legacy. I wanted to retire sooner. I wanted that beach house sooner. And I think I was just tired. I was tired of that corporate. And don't get me wrong, some of the companies I worked for were phenomenal. That great culture, great work environment, everything was fantastic. But I was tired of that clock in, clock out, and I don't want to sound like one of those business owners or entrepreneurs that I walk in the door at lunchtime and I leave at 3, because if that was the case, your business is not going to last 5 minutes. Whether you're on the phone 24/7, you're on emails 24/7, you're permanently contactable. And I wanted the more. I wanted something that was mine, that I'd created. I think what I learned from going from the traditional building contracting to the oil and gas is that I need that satisfaction. I need that sense of accomplishment. Maybe that's what my driver is that stand back and go, I did that. Not alone, but I led that. I did that. And that's what I think is my drive, is that, whatever you choose to do, regardless, if you want to be the best flip-flop salesman on the planet, I go for it, do it. I stand behind you. My kids, I tell them, going back to what you're saying in terms of, university against the roll your sleeves up sort of route. I've told my kids universities are non-negotiable. They have to go. I don't care whether they study art or geography or history. I want them to have that chapter in their life. I never had it from a traditional perspective. I want them to have it. I want them to have the student bodies, build those networks, those friendships for life. So they must go to university, study whatever you want. I don't care, but do something that you're passionate about, that you enjoy. I know that's a dangerous one because you can end up with a kid that's an artist, and then you have to keep paying. The daddy ATM keeps going for life. But my driver is, I want to stand back and go, Jesus, that was hard, but I did it. And with people I care about and the people that were there on that journey with me is to stand back and go, that was awesome.
That's really interesting. And I've had someone else on the podcast who's, by the way, catchphrase I've completely stolen. But I'll say he said the drivers in his life, time freedom, location freedom, financial freedom, right? It sounds like from what the story for yourself, there's a certain degree of that, swimming at your beach house, swimming in the ocean, and when he said it, I was like, wow, okay. For a start, I'm stealing it. That's that's really struck a chord with me, and it's very interesting. And I think you've clearly had this great time, 2022. I mean, that's when they started thinking about opening in Saudi, and we've had a business over here, for a long time now. And I imagine a lot of other businesses were thinking about that as well. So you knew that. We're going to get into the meat and bones of the business. You glossed over something, and I just want to understand this a bit more. And probably this will help people understand things if you want to open a business in Saudi. You touched on a partner, okay?
Yes.
And it sounds like that was quite a crucial cog in the wheel for the setup of the business, right? Why was that so important?
It wasn't. I'm not going to say it wasn't important, but it gave me that ability to then navigate the ministries, to get into areas that as an expat I can't go.
So this partner was a Saudi?
Correct.
Okay.
And he's since become, a very close friend, and, he's actively involved, but it's not essential you have a Saudi. In my line of business in Saudi, it's very, very advantageous. I can get things done that would normally take a long time, 14 months, whereas, it can take, 4 to 6 weeks to get done. And Saudi is not a Swiss watch by any stretch of the imagination. Things happen, systems change, systems crash, they upgrade systems. So there are elements that we can't control. But to have somebody who has a network within those entities is crucial.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So you went with a national that was super connected, that could just press the fast forward button on you getting things done. And that was, was the relationship with the partner initially were you actually paying him as a supplier, or did you and later come as a partner, or how did that evolve?
So I had met him a couple of times through when I was working within oil and gas. And so when I went over to Saudi, I gave him a call, said, look, are you free for a cup of tea? I sat down. I said to him, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm thinking about. He was like, Steve, no problem. For you, my brother, we'll set up a business and we go 50-50. I'm like, all right, cool. Let me go away and think about this. He says, no problem. When you're ready, give me a call and we go. I was like, okay, fine. I went away, gave him a call, and he said, let's go.
Okay.
And it was, I think we only formalized the paperwork about 10 days ago in terms of our partnership and agreement. So for 2.5 years, it's just been on a handshake and a cup of tea.
Has it all been in his name then?
Yeah.
Wow.
But he's been, his word is stronger than what's on a piece of paper. So he's one of the old school Saudi guys that if I give you my word, that's my word. You can bring me any piece of paper, I'll sign it, doesn't matter, but my word will overrule everything.
Steve, that is a really interesting thing you brought up there. And the reason I tell you this, again, I told you I've run a business for a while, right? And I've exited, been part of 2 exits of companies. One was a learning and development company I had here, where my partner bought me out. Looks good on paper, and then actually I did all right out of it, right? It was a painful process. I'm not going to lie. We went in business 50-50. I didn't speak to the guy for a year. We had to, when we wanted to do the exit, I basically, to get the price that I wanted, I had to prove that he'd done lots of naughty things, which I suspected. That is one of the many stories that you hear about people who go into business with partners. Then I hear your story. Didn't even have paperwork for 2.5 years. Without the paperwork, I'd have been stuck. So you were, that probably tells a lot about obviously the gentleman that you're in business with, but the trust and the level that you knew each other as well. What, to help the people that don't know Saudi, why were you comfortable? Because there's a degree of the culture there. Obviously, I know Saudi, right? There's something in the culture there that you either hear people say, and I don't mean this in an offensive way, that you get a lot of cowboys there, or you've got, and you mentioned old school there, that's why I'm focusing in on it, because I know a lot of people that have been burnt opening up in Saudi, but there's a lot of old school values there, and people that I have met in Saudi, do not come across that way at all. Help us understand what made you make that decision.
It's a gut feeling. Well, when you have a conversation with someone and you look in the whites of their eyes, it tells you who they are. If you're willing to listen to what you're seeing, if you go in with a preconceived outcome of what you're going in for, that's all you're going to see. Now, if you strip that down and you just go there, and as you've seen on your, quite a uncomfortable, vulnerable, non-ego sort of driven kind of guy. So I want to know who it is I'm dealing with. I said to you before we started recording that sometimes I'm too honest. Okay, I've got no filter between brain and mouth. So when I sit across from somebody, you can quite quickly work out who they are, what their values are, how they operate. I watch people, how they deal with other people, T-boys, wait staff, baristas, those type of thing. That tells me a lot about the person I'm with, how they communicate with that individual. The way I try to look at things, not always successfully, but the way I try to look at things is everybody, certainly in the Middle East, as an expatriate, is only here for the same reason as everyone else. They're here to earn some money to send back to their family. That's it. Create a better life for their family, regardless of their position. That's what they're trying to do. Yes, some earn more, some earn less. That's the reality of life. But everyone's in that same position. They're just trying to earn some money to give their family a better life. That's it. Now, how you treat that person will tells me who you are. Now, I met with OCAB. He's respectful. He's to everybody from, they're human beings at the end of the day. You don't treat them any other way. And that's how he was. So that for me was cool. Let's go.
Okay.
I've been, and been in the Middle East, both locals and expatriates. I've seen the hand flick, that, these things that instantly who that person is. And they're not for me. I wouldn't trust that person with a cup of coffee. So, that when you meet somebody, there wasn't, a long discussion. It was also the way he delivered it to me. It was, Steve, you want a business? Cool. I'll go with you. We do it. And I'll do this. You do that. It wasn't a big question I get asked, and it touches on what you're asking there, is a lot of people come to Saudi and the questions are, do I need a local partner? If so, what type of local partner would you recommend? Now, that's not for me to recommend. You got to go and meet that person. I can put you in front of people. You can go and talk to them. You can see what they like. If their culture and values align with what you want, then you go ahead. But Saudi is not isolated in this. This is a worldwide thing. There's Americans I wouldn't go into business with. There's Australians I wouldn't go into business with. There's South Africans I wouldn't go into business with. There's British people. And then there are people from those countries that I would go into business with. So it's not isolated to Saudi, but Saudi has this stigma that if you go there to do business with a local, you're going to get ripped off. They're going to steal your money. They're going to kick you out the country. It's not true. And that's probably the biggest part of my business, is to promote Saudi in a positive light, in a light that I'm a Western expat. I've come to Saudi Arabia, I've set up a business, and it's become successful. And long may it continue. Yes, I'm at the front, and it gives people a sense of comfort when they're talking to me about coming to Saudi and opening up their business, that me as a business owner, I'm sitting there promoting coming to Saudi and setting up a business. So there's good and bad in every country. There's horror stories from the early days here in the UAE. There's incredibly successful stories here in the UAE. So it depends who you're going to jump into bed with. A partnership is a marriage. It's not a one night stand or a fling. You go into partnership with someone, that's for life. And a breakup is probably just as stressful as a divorce.
Yes.
As I'm sure you know.
I have a few battle scars, my friend.
So
okay. Got you. Well, thank you for answering that. And I think just so everyone's clear, in a nutshell, just tell us what your business does now.
So we assist businesses or international businesses, by international, anything outside of Saudi Arabia, get set up in Saudi, from ancillary services, from visa allocations, Saudiization or Nitikat support, to trade license opening, call it commercial registration in Saudi Arabia, or CR for short, to serviced officers. We effectively take away that overhead burden that companies don't typically like to spend when going into new countries. So rather than hiring an accountant to then try and navigate the taxation requirements in Saudi, we take care of that at a fraction of the cost. Your HR services, payroll, there's certain elements that need to be adhered to in Saudi. GOSI, for example, which is your government social insurance, equivalent of national insurance in the UK, where the only difference is the employer pays it in Saudi, not the employee. So expatriates, it's 2% on package. Saudi nationals, it's 22.5% on their package. So we take care of it, and that's got to be paid on a monthly basis along with payroll. They run a similar WPS system as here in the UAE, and your business can very quickly be locked if you don't adhere to these regulations in Saudi.
Okay, so it's fair to say you're on the front line of what's going on. If a business wants to go in, you're on the front line. You can see what's going on. Could you give me what what types of businesses are you seeing, and how many? Like, what have you seen the change from 22 to now in Saudi? What have you seen happening over there?
In terms of businesses coming to Saudi, or in terms
what's it like? Some people might be some people might be watching this going, well, it's won the World Cup. The World Cup's going to be there. The Expo's going to be there. They keep hearing about this thing called NEOM. What's going on in Saudi, and what types of businesses are opening there, and why should someone open up there right now?
So the why, there's a huge untapped market there, and Saudi's been isolated from a growth perspective for many, many years. Majority of focus has been on oil and gas, and rightly so. That's now diversifying. they are, so the opportunity is not limited to construction or to oil and gas. It's everything from entertainment to media to marketing to AI. We were recently dealing with an AI entity that now unfortunately no longer exists or is currently non-existing. But there isn't one specific sector that we deal with or we see. More recently, mining. The natural resources available in Saudi Arabia is huge. The demand for copper, zinc is in Saudi, yet they're buying it from outside of Saudi and importing it. But they have natural reserves down in southern Saudi, near the Red Sea. So Madden, who has been the sort of mining entity in Saudi or ministry in Saudi, has not so much slept, but they haven't been pushed and supported as much as what they needed to be in order to get those natural resources out the ground. So there's a big drive now of breaking up the land, selling off concessions, and inviting in international businesses to start mining the resources. Now that is a slightly slower burn than in construction. Construction is get that up out the ground now quickly. Mining is obviously the other way around. You need to go down, so they need to do exploration, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a bit of a 5 to 7 year lead in before you get any, liquidity coming out of the ground in terms of return on investment. So that we see a lot of exploratory companies coming into the market from Canada, from Australia, from South America. There's a forum that they hold every January in Saudi, the Future Minerals Forum, which 2.5 years ago, there was a few people sort of came down and had a look. It was relatively successful. To last year, 2023, it had nearly tripled in size. To 2024, it was massive. It had just exploded. And there's interest in the mining sector from all over the world. There's a huge buzz behind mining. So you're not limited to the giga projects. There's a need for schools, both local and expatriate. There's a need for hospitals. There's a need for sports fields, not just 2034 World Cup. It's recreational. It's I recently got introduced to paddle tennis. I've been watching people play this for a couple of years now. And a mate of mine said to me, come, let's go play paddle. Went to play paddle, and the facilities now are popping up all over Saudi, and they're packed. So Saudi, the cycle track has just opened up in Riyadh. There's the Sports Boulevard is pushing the sporting side, the get up and get moving. So there isn't right, we're just going to build, new hotels. There's just so much happening. The need for housing for the local population is huge. So there's a big drive in local housing, or affordable local housing. So it's just not. It's very difficult to say, if you're a construction business, come to Saudi, you'll tap into this huge market. There really isn't a limit on your business. I'm sure you see it in the recruitment side. There's a need for everything.
I do, but it doesn't come without its challenges.
Oh.
Okay. And that's, partly what I wanted to sort of clarify here today, because there's a lot of people that find, for example, finding good staff in Saudi challenging. Where do you see the growth happening in Saudi? And again, just give a full rounded answer so people can understand what the landscape's like. Do you see the growth in Saudi being from within the local population, or is their plan to a bit of a build it and they will come philosophy like the UAE has?
I think it's a combination of both. Saudi, 35 million people. of which 65% are under the age of 35. So there's a huge youth there. The Saudiization, which is you have a certain percentage on your business activity that you need to employ locals. There's a huge demand for tertiary educated Saudis. And it goes back to ground zero. Where are they going to come from? Okay. What are companies doing to A, pass on the knowledge, and B, educate? So there's one thing doing a tick box exercise. Yes, I just hire 200 security guards and my Saudiization is ticked, but that's wrong. No. How are you, we as business owners or older individuals, we need to pass that knowledge on to the kids, to the youngsters, to the youth. We need to mentor them. We need to grow them. Now, whether it's an expat, a Saudi, it needs to be passed on. So there's a huge shortage of Saudi nationals that are being handed that information, that are being handed that knowledge. So the growth is twofold. One, it's, yes, build it and they will come because it gives more exposure to the local communities in terms of international businesses coming in, tourism coming in, but then it's also pulling that side of the sort of scale up to meet that. I remember going into Saudi in 2013, 2014, and it was go stand at the back of the queue. You arrive there and it was the angriest, passport control individual that I'm sure they could find in the whole of Saudi Arabia, and they put him there, just to deal with me. So now, people they're welcoming. They stand here, go here, help you here. So there's been this huge shift in, this is our country, you're not welcome, to come in, please, to have a look. This is what we've got. Yes, we're building. Yes, we're trying to grow it, but you're welcome. And that's, for me, the biggest draw in Saudi is that Arabic Saudi culture. It is beautiful. I joke with the guys in the office. I'm like, how can you guys be so hospitable, so welcoming, so warm, but then try to kill me on the roads, because the driving is insane. But the people, the mentality, they can't do enough for you. They're so welcoming. They're so warm. Maybe I'm just lucky and I've just really met the best Saudis, but I don't think so, because wherever I've gone, it's like that. Yes, there's a language gap barrier. Yes, there's a little bit of a culture barrier, but it's like anything. It's how you meet it. If you go in and say, oh, this guy doesn't speak English, he's stupid. You become one of those stereotypical tourists that just shouts louder in English, and then all of a sudden someone's going to understand you. It doesn't really work that way. But when you the break it down and try to communicate and try to learn a little bit of their culture, a little bit of their language, there's a bit of to and fro, and then you meet in the middle, and the people there are amazing. They really are. Yes, there's good people. Yes, there's bad people, but isn't there everywhere?
True. The other thing that I hear comes up a lot for people is a lot of people think if they're going to get a job in Saudi, is particularly expats, but to a degree, Saudi salaries are quite high in Saudi, right? So I think people need to be prepared if they're going to move there, that they're going to have to, staffing costs are quite high. But I think we also need to be an understanding of what the cost of living there is like. Could you sort of be a bit of a myth buster here and just tell us what it's like to live on the ground in Saudi?
So to go answer, I suppose, your first point, when I first came to Dubai in 2006, they were paying the same sort of, it was a hardship posting,
It wasn't really.
It wasn't, but it was perceived as a hardship posting. Back then it was construction workers and air hostesses, and that's kind of all you had, and a few other little dots. It's not the city that is we sit in today. Saudi is kind of at that point, a little bit behind what Dubai was, 20 years ago, but it's at that point. So in order to entice people to come, yes, the salaries are a little bit higher. Okay, that's now coming down and it's now pretty much on par with the UAE. So your salaries are in and around the same area. Cost of living, it depends which route you choose, and you have both options. It comes down to personal preference. You can live in compounds, which traditionally carry a premium, or you can rent villas or apartments outside of the compounds. Compound living, you have all the amenities on your doorstep. All right, living outside, you have to drive to a gym. You have to drive to a pool. So it's no different to living in a community in the UAE and living sort of in, say, Umsakim or Jumeirah. If you take a villa in Umsakim or Jumeirah, you may have to drive to the gym, you have to drive to the pool. Whereas if you live in, Mira or Dubai Hills, you may or may not have a pool 2 minutes walk from your house. So it's what you choose.
It's what you make of it. Okay.
The compounds, carry a premium. That's because you've got, maintained gardens. Some of the compounds have schools in, so those carry a higher premium.
Okay. So if I'm a business owner and I want to open up in Saudi, do I wholly own my company?
Yes.
You can.
Yes.
So just walk us through how that works.
So there's certain activities that are protected for the Saudi nationals. Okay. So engineering at the moment is protected. You need to have a local qualified Saudi national as part of your business in order to have an engineering license. Trading is you have to have a Saudi partner who either owns 35% of your business, or you can own 100% of it on your own, and you have to put a $10 million deposit down with the government. Now, me personally, if I had $10 million just lying around, I wouldn't be on this podcast today. I'd be sitting in my beach house. But those are the two biggest stumbling blocks in terms of businesses. If you're a contracting business, you can own 100%, and pretty much every other business you can own 100% as a foreigner.
Okay. When you say contracting business, what do you mean?
So fit out, construction, those
okay, construction, that's what you meant by it, yeah.
Recruitment, you can have 100%. The marketing 100%. So we'd need to sit down and specifically look, but the two biggest that we come across is trading. That you have to have 35% Saudi ownership or a $10 million deposit, and engineering, where you need a Saudi engineer, a local Saudi engineer as part of your business ownership. And that's also, project management.
Okay. So scale of 1 to 10, setting up in Saudi, how easy is it?
I'd say probably a 7.
Okay. Strong 7.
Strong 7, maybe a 7.25. But no, look, you need to be patient. It's the UAE kind of spoils it for everyone. If you've opened up a business in the UAE, within 6 days you can have the trade license. It's not quite that simple in Saudi. You need to have had. So if you want to be 100% foreign owner, you need to have had a history. You need to have audited financials. The trade licenses need to be attested, etc. So there's a bit of paperwork that needs to be done before you apply to open there.
Gotcha. Okay. So in terms of your business and you now, so it seems quite interesting, this space that you're in. I noticed that both Creative Zone and Virtue Zone, two of the big sort of business setup advisory firms in the UAE, have recently been acquired.
Correct.
Have you thought about what your goal is with your business, and is it something that that wants to continue to give you a lovely life? Do you have an exit plan? How are you thinking about the business?
I think for me personally, at the moment, it's still too early to have that one foot out the door. So I don't have a exit strategy. I'm happy where I am, where it is. I want to continue growing it. I want to have it at a service delivery size that I can stand back and go, yeah, now I'm there. That's where I want to get to. Where that is, I don't know. I haven't sat and gone, right, when I have X amount of revenue, then I'm tapping out. That's not. I'm not while money is a byproduct of what I do, it's not why I do it.
Okay.
I'm not money motivated is probably the best way to put it.
You're beach house motivated.
100%. I just want to wear one pair of board shorts for the rest of my life, but I'm not, it's not, I need, when I hit $10 million in the bank, then that's me, I'm out. It's not that. It's when my kids stand back and go, geez, Dad, well, is that why you've been in Saudi? That I think for me is my tap out point. Or when they go to university and I take the apartment next to them to make sure that no big ugly boys are chasing my daughter. No, I don't have funny enough, a gentleman I met not so long ago, he was involved in the sale of Virtue Zone, and he asked me that same question. He's like, if I could get you someone who was willing to pay you to buy the business, would you sell now? I said, your first immediate answer is, yeah, cut me a check, I'm gone. But that's not, I'm not at that point now. I think it's too soon. I've gone through all the battle wounds, and now I want to sit and enjoy some of the hard work.
Okay. Yeah. And as we wrap this, I want to ask you a question. What, in your experience as an entrepreneur, what advice would you give to any aspiring entrepreneur today? What would you say to them?
Just without sounding cliched, is you got to enjoy the ride. Make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Don't do it because you want to become a multi-gazillionaire, because that's a very short-lived drive. You got to walk in the office every day, see the people that are helping you build what you want to do, and they got to have smiles on their faces. If they don't, what's the point? And I know every industry is different, and some people are entrepreneurs without having an office full of staff, and they traders, and hats off to them. Well done, that's amazing. But for me, I need to walk in, see the smiles on the people's faces. I get some positive feedback from clients. That's good. And no, you've got to enjoy it. You've got to enjoy it. Otherwise, it's very difficult to get up every morning and be motivated. Yeah, you can do it for maybe 6 months, a year. After that, you still got to wake up, get out of bed. And, at 47, I've got to send a fax to my legs to tell them to get out of bed in the morning.
I'm glad you said fax, not email. It takes a little bit longer. Yeah.
Oh, no, if it was an email, it had to be on dial-up. Not that probably most people on this know what dial-up is. But yeah, so you have to be motivated. And where do you get your motivation from? That's only you can answer that for yourself.
I think that's real wise advice. And if you don't enjoy what you do, and if you don't, and if you can't there's going to be real tough times. You need to be deeply resilient as an entrepreneur. And if you can't, the only thing that will get you through that is if you actually believe and enjoy what you do. And I think that's brilliant advice to leave people with. Steve, I want to say thanks very much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you.
Very inspiring. And I'm sure, I hope lots of people here will be inspired by the journey.
Thank you,
my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode and I look forward to seeing you on the next show. Cheers.